Hi, folks. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn. We'll get started in just a minute. For those of you just joining us, feel free to use the chat and let us know you're here. Welcome to Cyber Cloaking webinar. Feel free to use the chat and let us know who's here today, where you work. We have Dennis from Maine, but it's getting beautiful in Maine. Love it up there. Colby
Here come the
College.
locust.
Thanks, Dennis. What's that, Tom?
Here come the locusts. The cicada.
Yeah.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Trip. Good morning. Hi, Stuart.
Hey guys. All right. Welcome to Johnny from New York City. We have someone from my stomping grounds. I was born and raised in New York City. Johnny, welcome.
Laura, I spent 22 years in New York City.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
In Manhattan?
In Manhattan. Raised 5 kids there.
Oh, I was born and raised in Queens, but I hung out in Manhattan. Hey, Greg McShane from CISA, welcome. Everybody, as we wait for the last few people to roll in, please go ahead and use the chat to say hello. We have Samantha with St. Louis, UWASI. Hi, Samantha. And we have our friend Jim Nowak from Arcos. Hello to Priya. Priya, good to see you back. Right. Well, I have that it's a couple minutes after 12, and since we are on a lunch break or people are eating as they're watching, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you all to the All Hazard Consortium's third in the series of cyber virtual discussions. Today's Lunch and Learn or webinar is on cyber cloaking, which is a new technology that will teach you how to hide your data from hackers. So appropriate now in the scheme of what's going on in the news. So I'm really excited for today's webinar. My name is Laura Johnson. I'm the Director of Conferences for the All Hazards Consortium. And as you guess, we're all in a webinar mode, so you are muted. We are recording today's session, so once we finish, we will send you the link so that you can share it with colleagues and friends. And feel free to use the chat to say hello at any time, to ask questions. You can also use the Q&A function for questions if you like. I'd like to introduce my boss, our Executive Director, Tom Moran. Tom?
Thank you, Laura. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. This is a big issue, and the consortium has a number of working groups working on different parts of this. But the problem is the cyber landscape has changed dramatically just in the last year. Much of the nation's critical infrastructure has already been mapped by the bad guys, right? So if you're a critical infrastructure owner, how do you protect yourselves, right? Sometimes they're already inside. Okay, how do you do this? And we've seen a number at the federal level, the state level, certainly commercial level. We've seen a number of different approaches to, hey, add this, hey, buy this, do this. But it's really it's a more holistic issue. It's an education issue, it's a training issue, it's a policy issue, but it's also a technical issue. And so we have been looking at a number of them. This is one. Quick, fast, simple to basically hide or cloak things, people, groups, devices, routers, equipment, whatever, hide it. It becomes invisible to hackers, right? And most of them are auto sensors and things like that. So it's one way to do this. And so we have been, just as a backstory, we met Reprivida. They had an interesting solution. We ran it through our first test work group. We have a process to shoot holes in everything, and it moved through that pretty quick. Then we got to the big group, right? These are the Fed, state, local, commercial folks, and pretty much most of us, man, this is really interesting. We'd like to hear more, and so it's passing through our technical sifting, if you will. Today we're going to get a little deeper dive. So I'm really glad Trip Hardy and his team are on the phone with us. broad perspective of the issue. Certainly what you're going to hear today about what they're developed or have developed and are continuing developing. But the big idea here is to how do we get everybody on the same page with regard to the threat, right? So I know what you know at the same instant. And then how do we protect that? So there's two components to this I find very interesting as far as our use cases go. You may have others. So Trip, I want to thank you and your team for joining us here. I'm really looking forward to this. So Laura, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Tom. So as Tom mentioned, today we have Stuart Vance. He's a solutions architect with Aprivita, and his colleague Luke Hatcher, who's the DevOps engineer. And we're going to start off with some opening comments with Aprivita's CEO, Trip Hardy. So Trip, I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen, and the floor is yours.
Terrific. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Tom. Let me just make sure you guys can see my screen. Is that working okay?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, excellent. Well, first of all, would like to thank everyone for participating in what is certainly an important topic, unfortunately, a very timely topic. Cyber used to be thought of as kind of a theoretical risk that could be mitigated if you took some basic precautions. But as we're now witnessing, unfortunately, over and over again with breaches like last week's Colonial Pipeline and SolarWinds before that, and the list goes on and on, the severity and frequency of attacks represents a real and present danger that requires more rigorous solutions that can be deployed very quickly. And so that's one of the things we want to talk about today. The statistics are almost overwhelming. Companies spend like $100 billion per year on cyber, but losses are estimated to be approximately $2 trillion per year. And so that's not what you would describe as a good return on investment. So the question is, why is cyber so challenging? And the problem is multifaceted and has been years in the making. I'm going to generalize here a little bit, but there are, a handful of reasons why this is such a big problem and why it's so challenging. It starts with the fact that the internet was built without privacy or security. In the early days of the commercial internet, it was not thought of as a place to conduct serious business. At that time, there were private networks, and each application or protocol had its own pipe coming into the building and room, and you had very clear legal demarcs. You knew where the wire crossed the property, entered the building, you knew where it entered the server room. And then the internet came along and disintermediated all of that. And what you may not realize is that the rules of the commercial internet were literally made up back in 1991. There was no quality of service. The massive oversubscription was allowed. And most importantly, there was this thing called any-to-any connectivity, or global IP visibility. Well, global IP visibility means that every device can see every other device anywhere in the world. The result is that anyone can attack anyone else from anywhere, often, as we've seen over and over again, with little consequence. This also means that we as individuals are now exposed to the cyber risk of bad nation states. And so what this slide is showing is a single server that was set up just outside of Austin, Texas, and within minutes of being stood up is being bombarded in a global botnet attack. By the way, using this threat tool, a visualization tool, which we'll demo later and show you later, we've been able to see parts of the US power grid calling out to China. We've seen equipment from an oil field calling to Russia, and even a printer from an important cyber information sharing group calling to China each time something was printed. Unfortunately, this is a pervasive issue that we all face. Another challenge is that our devices are constantly spewing data. For example, this is a view of a laptop on a single website. We are capturing this data using an application called Wireshark that is monitoring packet flow. And as you can see, it's constantly calling out over and over and over again. Now, just imagine multiplying this massively by numerous websites and applications, et cetera. So that was just looking at the application layer. The reality is that devices are spewing data at every layer, which includes applications, software as a service, networks, devices, ad containers on devices, the cloud, IoT, industrial control systems, et cetera. So the reality is that breaches can occur at any level and move to these other layers and propagate. And that's what makes cyber risk so complex. Another challenge is that organizations do not exist on an island unto themselves. They are interconnected and they have dependencies and supply chains that can number in the hundreds or thousands of interconnected third parties. And this has profound implications on cyber risk, since these third parties typically lack cyber resources, both technology and expertise. They lack situational awareness, and they all have widely varying cyber maturity. And enterprises typically find it difficult to continuously monitor this third-party risk, and they certainly are unable to see beyond those third parties. And ultimately, the enterprises are only as strong as their weakest link, and the adversaries know this and they exploit this. Another challenge, and again, this was in full view last week, is the convergence of IT and OT, or operational technology. Until recently, OT was isolated or air-gapped from IT, but that is changing because of the drive for efficiency. The problem is that legacy control systems usually lack protections and are highly vulnerable to attack. And the adversaries know this. They know how to identify the specific systems used by different organizations, and they know the specific vulnerabilities of each. And with the rollout of 5G, this risk is going to be magnified even more, as low latency is going to accelerate the automation of these plants and equipment, et cetera, and lead to a dramatic growth in the industrial Internet of Things. The last major challenge, or at least the last one I'm going to mention today, is that there's been a major shift occurring in network security. So traditional network security has focused primarily on securing the network perimeter and has been based on firewalls and IP addresses and location. And once you were inside those four walls, either physically or virtually, you were trusted and you could move around laterally. And unfortunately, this means that once attackers get inside, they too can move laterally throughout the network with little risk of detection. And attackers can also exfiltrate data, as most organizations are not actually monitoring data leaving their networks and identifying where it's going. So this was a trend that was already underway because of software as a service and cloud-based computing. And obviously that trend was massively accelerated by COVID. And as a result, you've got more work being performed off the enterprise network than on it. You've got more users outside the enterprise network than inside, and more user traffic destined for the cloud than the enterprise data center. So there again, this is another impact or resulted in an explosion in the size of the attack surface, and has created a need for a different approach to network security. So in light of these challenges and vulnerabilities, what are the adversaries doing? Well, they're actively targeting the vulnerabilities of each of these challenges. They continuously scan organizations. They continuously scan employee devices and third parties. And what you're looking at here is just an example. This is a view of what's called Shodan, which is a commercially available application that scans for unprotected networks. So, the adversaries now are able to just access, commercially available applications to help them identify vulnerabilities. And as I mentioned a moment ago, they are able to identify the specific systems that are being used by different organizations, and they know the vulnerabilities of those specific systems. And the other thing that they're doing is they're increasingly relying upon automation. They're using machine learning to detect and attack known vulnerabilities of various organizations. Now, if these challenges were not enough, those of you who are on this call are in the business of crisis management. And in a crisis, whether that's a natural disaster or cyber, your normal communication channels can go down, and security measures can be essentially inaccessible, which is also something that's actively exploited by bad actors. So you may have to suspend your normal command and control structure. Any changes to the infrastructure may have to be authorized through a committee, which can take time. And so, these are challenges that are amplified. And what you need is something that you can spin up right then and there that provides security, collaboration, interoperability, and governance. And ultimately, that's the idea behind the all hazards SISNet. So in the face of all of these challenges and the growing sophistication of adversaries, how can we all be more cyber secure? Well, the good news is that achieving a higher level of cybersecurity is not a secret. It's been clearly defined by the NSA, and it involves micro-segmentation and zero trust. And it includes authenticating users into an environment using multi-factor authentication. It includes authenticating devices into protected environments, ideally using X.509 certificates. And it also includes wrapping these protected environments using strong algorithms. The challenge, so it's known what you should do to be secure. The challenge is that up until now, meeting or replicating the NSA mobility specs has historically been difficult because it required cobbling together a long list of hardware components into a patchwork. And that's a process that can be expensive, hard to provision, and also prone to vulnerabilities. And the problem with using certificate-based systems is that they can be hard to provision and manage. And so most organizations just revert back to username and password. And so what Reprivita has figured out is how to enable all of this out of software in a manner that is largely invisible to end users. And so what does this allow us to do? What we have is a community of trust. At least that's what we call it. It's a secure enclave. It enables organizations to dynamically deploy encrypted environments that replicate the NSA encryption standards at scale anywhere in the world using software. And these enclaves are hardware agnostic and ultimately will work on any device in any operating system and over any physical transport layer, like the internet, of course, cell phone, VoIP, satellite, microwave, et cetera. What we do is we combine multi-factor authentication with X.509 certs, which binds an individual's identity to a device. And that device can be bring your own device. That device is then authenticated into a community of trust that is unique to that individual, team, work group, et cetera. And that the community of trust is then wrapped in multi-layer encryption. Specifically, I don't want to get too technical here, but Diffie-Hellman Group 20 key exchange. And per the NSA specs, we can lock down all but 2 ports, one for key exchange and one for data. And what that does is largely makes that environment invisible to adversaries. Keep in mind that when we talk about locking down ports, the average application on your smartphone has 65,000 ports. So there are lots of backdoors. Communities of trust also ultimately, the most important in my mind or in our mind use of communities of trust is to enable the implementation of micro-segmentation at scale. So each of these dynamically created enclaves can be segmented so that members are only able to see and access the data and applications that are authorized uniquely to them in that specific community of trust. And these cyber enclaves can be deployed on top of existing infrastructure. So this doesn't require kind of ripping and replacing existing network infrastructure. It can be done on basically a crawl, walk, run basis around a work group or around critical assets that need to be micro-segmented away from being accessible by the internet. And the thing about microsegmentation is, even if an adversary penetrates one part of a network, it prevents them from moving laterally and accessing other sensitive information. The other thing about the way in which we construct these enclaves, again, communities of trust, is that they can be rapidly dissolved and reconstituted. So if you think about normal network infrastructures, which are kind of monolithic, which is kind of like a castle on a hill. It's highly visible and under constant attack. Our tactical enclaves can be spun up and spun down on command. And when facing a threat, the enclaves can be dissolved and effectively shed like skin, and the perimeter can be reconstituted. And so when you can treat your server side infrastructure like skin that you can effectively shed, then you can do things like timestamp your environment so that after every 30 days, they're recreated. And that way, you don't somehow allow a bad actor to be sitting inside your network unbeknownst to you. In addition to standing up these secure enclaves, we also make it possible to uniquely monitor and inspect the traffic coming at and leaving each one of these enclaves uniquely. And we do that in real time using a tool that we call global threat intelligence. Stuart and Luke are going to go into this in a bit more detail, but at a super high level, what it allows us to do is in real time detect threats and interdict those threats. And it involves placing low-cost sentries or network sensors, both inside and outside each of these secure environments, and then individually monitoring them using both known bads, i.e. Threat feeds, and also using artificial intelligence. And when you're narrowing your focus down to just these environments, what it makes it possible to do is more easily identify anomalous behavior, which improves your chances of actually identifying, zero-day events and that sort of thing. So that's a high-level discussion of the very substantial challenges that we all face. We view that the ability to deploy microsegmentation at scale and authenticate people into secure environments is a critical but very quick way of enhancing cybersecurity. So what I'd like to do at this point is hand the screen share over and the discussion over to Stuart and to Luke to take a look at the technology and how it's actually implemented.
Good afternoon, all, or morning, depending on where you are. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen here. We're going to go through a few things. Give me just a quick moment. Well, since I'm having a little trouble getting my, there we are. Let's see if this will work. Well, it's not. So let me just go ahead and run through my information. So as Trip set up exactly what the community of trust does from a general perspective, what I'd like to talk a little bit about now are the use cases, and then we'll get into a demo. So one of the beauties of using a community of trust is that, well, let's consider the traditional client server application. And I'm not sure I can come up with a great example for your industry, but I can give you a good example in the healthcare industry. Let's say you're at a doctor's office. You're using an healthcare information system. You've got a traditional client server model of each workstation in the office has an application, and there's a big honking piece of iron in the back of the office where the server is actually run. And that works great, except that now that server is a hard single point of failure, and it requires substantial cost outlay to be able to deploy that. It requires substantial monitoring and management to keep it up and running. What we'd really love to be able to do is move this server to the term we're going to use in quotation marks is the cloud. Now, as many of you probably know, the cloud is just another name for someone else's computer. It might mean a server in AWS, it might mean a server in Microsoft Azure, but what we'd really love to be able to do is take our server and deploy it to the cloud where we have high availability, we have excellent connectivity. The problem is we need to be able to protect our client to server communication between each workstation and this service out in the cloud. That's one of the things that the community of trust can do. We also need to be able to take existing web-based applications, and this is much like the all hazards dashboard that you guys are used to. We want to be able to take that, have it deployed in a sort of a multi-tenant environment, because you guys are all from different organizations. You all need to be able to access SISNet. The problem is that we need much better security for that application. We need to be able to cloak it so that no one can see what's going on. We need to be able to have multi-factor authentication to ensure that only the people who are allowed to access that resource are actually able to do so. And we need data encryption to ensure that no one can snoop on the traffic. Another interesting use case comes from the Department of Defense world. A lot of DoD contractors deal with controlled, unclassified information. Well, in a DoD contractor, they need to be able to isolate that controlled, unclassified information from their general computing environment. The community of trust allows you to set up an environment where you've got an internal server that's hidden behind a community of trust enclave, and that you can only get access to that information through the enclave. And one of the other key things, and I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this, and Trip referred to earlier, is we've got to find a better way to segment and secure operational technology networks from information technology networks. Now, the Colonial Pipeline hack is one that we still don't know as enough information about to be able to say exactly what was compromised, because they're keeping that very close to the vest. And it certainly sounds like the operational technology networks were not actually compromised. But we nonetheless need to ensure in every use case that if there's an operational network, if it's truly critical infrastructure, it really should be air gapped. The problem with air gapping is that now monitoring and management and maintenance becomes much harder. We can use a community of trust as a way of bridging that gap so that only specific users and in a strongly authenticated fashion are able to jump from the IT network to the OT network. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the community of trust features in more detail. Cloaking is a big one. When you're going to connect from the cot to the cot in an encrypted enclave, and then from there you go out to other secured or protected resources, no one can see what you're doing or where you are virtually going. That means that once you're in the cot, even if somebody is sniffing packets, they can't see where you're going. In a traditional model where you're just using SSL security or TLS security for web connections, yes, people can't look at the traffic inside, but they can still see where you're going. And they can determine quite a lot about what you're doing just by doing some basic traffic analysis. The second feature is data privacy. With the encryption that we use in a COT, it will take a bad actor from months to years to be able to actually look at a packet stream and crack that data open. I talked a little bit earlier about server migration. We want to be able to take our local hardware resources and virtualize those to the cloud. The key thing there is that you've got to have the security infrastructure to be able to do that. You can't just move a server out to the cloud and boom, you're up and running, because the normal ways of accessing that are just a port on the server. And if that port is exposed to the entire internet, then any bad actor can beat on that. They might not be able to get in, but they can just hammer on that port, maybe through a denial of service, or maybe they can find a way to actually hack their way into the system through that exposed port. With a community of trust protecting it, you have to go into the community of trust first, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a couple of minutes. But once you get into the community of trust, now you've got a secure path from your workstation to the server in the cloud. Strong authentication. In 2021, multi-factor authentication is pretty much a hard and fast requirement. Even if you have a username and a really strong password, you can have a 30, 40 character password, but if that password is fixed and never changes, it may take a while to hack it or crack it, but if, let's say, the back end is ever attacked and someone gets access to the password information, they can, with enough time, brute force crack the password file. What we've ensured with strong authentic or with multi-factor authentication is that you have to have at least 2 factors to be able to gain access to the resources. Something you know, which is your password, and something you have, which typically is a device. It might be a hardware device. It might be something like the Google Authenticator app or the Microsoft Authenticator app on your phone. And when we connect in, you go to that app, it gives you a 6-digit code, and when you log in, you put your username, you put your password, and then you're forced to enter the security token, that 6-digit number, in to ensure that you can get through to the next step. Tripp talked a lot about microsegmentation. The goal here is that we want to ensure that only authorized users can access those protected resources, and those protected resources are hard hidden behind the community of trust. They are not directly accessible. You have to authenticate and be in this secure enclave before you can get any further. Logging and monitoring. Once you're in the enclave, all connectivity is logged for auditing and review purposes. That helps ensure that if there is some bad actor that's gotten in, and usually this might be an infected PC that is connected to the enclave, if that PC starts beaconing out to some place that is out of the norm, we can catch that through GTI and start an interdiction process to kill the connection as quickly as possible. And finally, I know a lot of you guys are dealing with a strong regulatory environment. We have another piece of the product called the Compliance Suite that provides management and assessment tools to help you maintain compliance against a raft of cybersecurity frameworks. A lot of the ones we have are geared more towards the DoD and may not be as applicable, but we do have support for NIST 800-171, for CMMC, for HIPAA, and perhaps most importantly to this group, we also support the oil and natural gas C2M2 cybersecurity standard. It's not quite fully baked yet, but we are in phase 3 of our deployment of that in the compliance suite and should have that finished by August. So if you have to adhere to that cybersecurity standard, we actually have a way for you to go through a very simple assessment tool to determine how far along in your cybersecurity maturity model you are, and then help you get to a more secure level as part of your assessment. Let's talk a little bit about the demo today. And as part of this, what we're going to do, so we've been in conversation with All Hazards Consortium directly about providing a community of trust to be able to securely access the damage assessment use case dashboard, or SISEnet, and some other tools. So what are our needs? We need to be able to securely and in a cloaked fashion, in an audible fashion, access SISEnet and the use case dashboard. We'd love to be able to have a secure file and document repository that is only accessible through hard, solid authentication and is not allowed direct access from the internet. And finally, we want a secure conferencing and collaboration environment. Well, how do we handle that? Well, the first is we deploy a secure enclave allowing only authorized users to access the resources. We configure authentication so that it requires a username, password, and some sort of multi-factor authentication mechanism. Protected resources can be websites, applications in the cloud, documents, or even computers. Let's say there is a common computing resource that you need to be able to sign into in the cloud that has an application you need to be able to run. Well, we can use the community of trust to provide a hardened environment so that only authenticated users can access that computer in the cloud. And finally, it allows for dynamic and rapid deployment of these secure environments for individual teams and the consortium as a whole. So if you have individual teams that each need access to a specific set of data, but the teams don't need to intermingle, then we can rapidly deploy a community of trust, a secure enclave for each one of those groups pretty much on the fly. So let me go ahead and reshare my Windows environment. So here we have a regular old Windows desktop, but I have some apps installed and I have a website that I want to be able to access. In particular, what I want to be able to do is get to the All Hazards Consortium website. Now, you'll see that not much is happening right now because I can't get there from here. This server, it's a Windows server in the cloud with a website deployed on it. And as you can see, I can't get there because it is hidden behind the community of trust. To be able to access it, I just need to fire up the COT Connect application. And it takes a little bit longer because I'm running on a virtual machine, but there we are. And I want to actually just start over entirely. So I'm going to delete my existing community of trust, and I'm going to create a new one. And the one I'm going to go to is salesdemo.repdev.cloud. So all I have to do is enter the domain name of the community of trust that my IT person has given me. I click join. And what it's going to do is prompt me for my username and password. So I'm going to put in my username, which is John Doe. And I'm going to log in. Now you'll notice it's a little bit hard to read and we need to fix the contrast in this, but there's another button down here that if I clicked, I could actually do single sign-on through our Microsoft Azure tenant. We use Microsoft 365, we use Teams, and we have all of our users deployed in Azure. I'm not going to do this because my my Azure password is very long and complex, and I don't remember off the top of my head. And rather than copying and pasting, we're just going to go in using this method. And for all hazards in a multi-tenant environment, if you guys are using this to access SiceNet, you're going to be given a username and password specifically for the application. But I just wanted to point out that we can indeed support a single sign-on system if you're in a single tenant environment. But now that I've got my username and password in, I'm going to log in. Now it's prompting me for my code. So I'm going to fire up my Authenticator app. And put in my one-time code. And now I have my community of trust connection or my community of trust deployed in COT Connect. So now all that's left to do is connect. And again, on actual hardware, this will go much faster. On a VM, it just takes a couple of seconds longer. But once it's connected, we will see no, I'm definitely connected. There we go. It just took a moment for the page to load. So before, couldn't access. Now I'm able to get in to the home page for the collaborative tool to be able to access all of the protected information. It's not just a website, however. I can also, let's say I need to go sign into that server and there's some application on there that I need to be able to access. I can go into Microsoft Remote Desktop now. I've got access to my system interactively as well. And finally, I've got the system configured to act as a file server. So just going into Explorer, I can go to my All Hazards link, and you'll see that this is using AHC demo, which is the URL, or sorry, the domain name for the server that's being protected by the community of trust. So I'm just accessing this directly. This is going from my computer in Huntsville, Alabama, through the community of trust, and then to the server protected by the community of trust in the cloud. And it all looks like I'm accessing a local file system or a local server. And that's pretty much it. Actually, excuse me. Let me go ahead and also show you. Let me stop my share. And we now want to show you a little bit about the GTI application. And let me go ahead and share my screen again to that. You saw some screenshots of this from Trip earlier. And you'll see that we are monitoring live what's going on inside the community of trust. I have a couple of users that are currently connected, but we're also seeing a lot of other activity going on down here, including some, oops, there's something going on to Beijing Baidu Netcom Science and Technology Co. Limited. So there's actually something or someone who's accessing that system through our community of trust. Well, the good thing is I happen to know that's Luke doing it to be able to give me a little traffic. So he's just going around and hitting a bunch of different websites to be able to access it. But you can see what's happening live on your network through GTI. And if I zoom out a little bit, we can see exactly what's happening. Now, let's say we see a bunch of stuff going on and we want to be able to drill down. What I may want to do is turn off real-time access. And what I can then do is see what all has been happening over the last little bit. And now we see all the places that people in the COT have been visiting. And this allows us to drill down into what's actually going on. And hopefully we can figure out fairly quickly whether this is legitimate traffic or whether it's not. If it's a legitimate action, then we don't have to worry about it. But we can also, if this is something we're concerned about, we can create a ticket into your trouble ticketing system so that if we're concerned about this, we can say, well, I'm not really sure. So let's create an Amber Alert. And that way, the people on our network operations team or security operations team can go and investigate that in much greater detail. And at that point, I think we'll go ahead and open things up to questions.
Okay, Stuart, thank you so much. For our listeners on the line, if you have questions for the team at Reprivita, feel free to use the Q&A or chat feature. Do you integrate with TA? I don't know, never heard of that. MFA/SSO. My goodness, you guys, your engineers will probably know what that means.
Exactly. I don't know that we've ever tested against Okta, but we can certainly take that as an action item to go back and check. What we've mostly done so far are integrating with basically any app where you can scan a barcode, and that will then generate the token that you're going to use for doing your sign-on. In terms of single sign-on, we can support, we currently support pretty much any application that does, and Luke, you may want to jump in here and use the exact terminology for what we do, but we do support a wide variety of identity providers.
Sure, I can share the video real quick. Let me just start by, I didn't say hi earlier to everyone, so I apologize, my video was off, but just real quickly, let me go ahead and share my screen. Yeah, so what we can integrate with, here's our list of identity providers. User-defined ones are SAML v2.0. We do OpenID Connect is the big one that integrate. That's how we do with Microsoft, Keycloak, OpenID Connect, and there's some socials, but typically anything with the OpenID Connect or a SAML-based one, we can integrate with, or even user federation using Kerberos or LDAP real quickly with that. So I can stop the share and try to get the questions back up. But then again, as Stuart was mentioning, it would be SAML2 and OpenID will work. Yep. So I mean, that's pretty, I believe, I don't want to say common, but you know, there's a lot of those integrations there. Thanks for the question.
Okay, Lou, thank you. Stuart, are mobile devices covered by what you showed us today? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yep.
There we go.
We do support Android devices right now and are rapidly working on Apple devices. Apple devices provide an interesting challenge in the way that we're handling. Right now we're using IPsec as our encrypted tunnel mechanism. And Apple just provides a few challenges that we're still working around. We're also looking at other tunnel deployment mechanisms like OpenVPN. Sorry, I'm getting my opens mixed up. And that's something we are looking at deploying fairly rapidly as an alternative, because some people also don't like IPsec traversing their internal networks or certainly passing through their external gateways. So yes, we are working on that, but currently Apple devices are still a few months away.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Another question we have is, what's the vision for the GTI Ops Center with regards to cross-sector coordination? What are you doing to get government and industry on the same page for threats?
Well,
Luke, you want to grab that?
sure. Yeah. So with the global threat intelligence, we can integrate with intelligence sharing. So we've used something called mind meld, and what you're able to do there is between those different sectors, if you have a main security hub and those tickets we're creating, that traffic we're interacting with, if we need that to be able to be shared, hey, I found this on my network over on the gas, and then you're in water, whatever, you can create that, and then we could use another button we had up there was the enrich button, and that gets distributed across those networks so that we're able to do that. Another option is on that traffic screen on the global threat intelligence is what we're seeing in there is the data that's traversing what we call a probe, and that probe just sits on the external part of that network, that gateway to come in, and that's how we're seeing everything go out and come in. But we could have additional probes in other communities of trust that we're able to drill down, and we open up a list. This is my probe in Wisconsin County. This is Rappahannock. As you go down, we can drill down into those specific feeds if we're concerned about it. There's a lot of threat intelligence automation. Hey, we know these are bad actors. You can get those to plug in and give you alerts. It's a framework. What we have there is to show you all that in real time, and you can plug in other tools to add, to make your suite that you're saying.
Okay, Luke.
And if I might, Luke, weigh in. This is Trip. One of the questions is in terms of the cross-sector information sharing. Information sharing is a very noble goal, but it's been a massive challenge because of all the reluctance to share, uncertainty around what can be shared with whom and when. And then the other challenge is that it can be overwhelming, right? If it's not developed in a way that's where a lot of that information can be shared in an anonymized manner, but machine to machine, that too is challenging. And so one of the things that we are keenly focused on, so as you can see here, we're focused on being able to deploy microsegmentation at scale and then monitoring each of those environments. But the other thing is a very strong focus on information sharing, and we're working collectively with All Hazards, its members, and other ISACs and ISALs to develop what we call next gen information sharing, which is really focused on enabling the real-time sharing of threat data and ultimately building out the capability to enable true artificial intelligence around the identification of threats and the dissemination of that information in ways that people are comfortable, meaning i.e. that it's anonymized. And ultimately even going so far, and I think this is especially relevant to the energy sector, as I alluded to earlier, the bad actors know exactly what the vulnerabilities are for different equipment systems. And those systems tend to be concentrated geographically. And so to the extent that we can help identify a threat and then help identify how to mitigate that threat and just make that something that's disseminated very, very quickly, that is our ultimate end goal, is to make it possible to aggregate up this data in data pools and for members to access that data so that their systems can detect these threats more rapidly.
Thanks, Trip. You mentioned the energy sector. Do you have a specific case where you helped a client in energy?
Well, we're doing an implementation right now where there is an energy company that has a few hundred municipals and co-ops, and the energy company itself wants to have more situational awareness around just threats that are coming at it, But more importantly, when you looked at that screen view a moment ago, what's really critical is that you're able to see where your network is connecting to and who it's connecting to. And if your network is connecting to Russia and North Korea and China, well, that's a pretty obvious thing that needs to be interdicted. So, level one is situational awareness around networks or around specific sensitive assets. So you can put network sensors up all over the place, and you can put them in front of specific assets that might be critical assets that you really want to monitor. But in this particular instance, there's two layers. One is, what's happening at the network layer for the company, but it's interconnected to several hundred municipals and co-ops that lack the cyber sophistication, that don't have the resources necessarily to identify advanced threats. And so what they're looking to do is actually push this capability out to those municipals and co-ops. And what that does is two things. It allows the company at the center to see the threats that are coming at them from their dependencies, but it allows you to take that protective umbrella and push it out. And one of the things that we've been very, very focused on is two things: extensible, and related to that is affordability, right? In order for these things to work, they've got to be deployed and deployable in a manner that doesn't kind of break the bank. And so that's a use case that's current, where it's focused on the enterprise, but really focused on making it extensible.
Yeah, Trip, when you showed that map, that is so interesting, but also very scary. But that brought it home for me. Thank you. How quickly would someone be able to implement what you just showed us?
Well, Laura, that's a function of kind of their architecture and how things are set up. But these are things that can be deployed relatively quickly. I mean, the idea around a community of trust, again, it's not rip and replace network. It's come in and overlay with the ability to stand up COTS very quickly. So right now we can stand up a community of trust in a couple of hours. As we round out some of the enhancements that we're making, we're going to have that down to almost an automated basis. So, deploying a sensor also, depending upon where it goes. I mean, generally we'd want to have some conversations about where in the network we might want to place a sensor, but that also can be done very quickly. So, we're talking hours and not days.
Okay, thank you. Okay, team, we have a question here from Dennis. What is the underlying microsegmentation architecture?
That's a good question. I mean, with how we can micro-segment it is using containerization and putting things, you could segment the networks by firewall routing and things of that nature, but we do use the containerization to be able to do that. So NSX.
And in general, when you're talking about micro-segmenting the networks or micro-segmenting services, it all depends on the environment you're deploying in. If it's an IT versus OT deployment in within a, let's call it an energy sector company, then the deployment is largely going to be on-prem using a dedicated server that effectively is going to be bridging the gap between the IT and OT networks. And it's all IPsec based at present. So you would fire up the connection on your workstation, connect into the community of trust, and once you're authenticated and connected there, you're then allowed to proceed past our firewall into the OT network. In the case of a cloud service, you would have a server out on the internet. It's segmented from the internet because it is hidden behind the community of trust, and only a person coming through the community of trust server is allowed access past the server into the cloud-based service.
Okay, thank you. Okay, team, that's the questions that we have. Trip, any closing comments?
Well, we obviously sincerely appreciate the opportunity. We appreciate everyone's time. We know how challenging cyber is already. We know how that's amplified in the environment that you all are operating in terms of working in a crisis. And look, we remain keenly interested in collaborating with the All Hazards Consortium and its members to try and leverage, whatever capabilities we've developed, which are relatively flexible and scalable to help solve problems. And we're not trying to be, one size fits all. We really want to, roll our sleeves up and get in and figure out how we can help. So, we do have a pilot that we're going to be operating with the all hazards. The idea is to authenticate people into the SISEnet to make it so that the SISEnet can be highly secure, and where people are authenticated into those environments that they are uniquely authenticated into and authorized to get into, and to make that something that can be dynamic and can be responsive to the sudden needs that you as crisis managers have. So, but thank you again for your time today, and thank you, Tom and Laura.
Okay, thank you so much to Stuart Vance, Luke Hatcher, and of course, Trip. We appreciate your ability to do this webinar for our listeners today. Tom, closing comments from you.
No, I hope you all enjoyed this. We are always looking at kind of emerging solutions to these use cases, right? So if you have a use case or you have a solution, I put in the chat down there, please register with us at siceusa.org. We're grateful that Trip and company have been working with us. We've learned a lot in the process. And I think at the end of the day, it's a compilation of efforts and groups and agencies and private sector working together. So thank you all for attending today. Trip, thanks again. I think it was very informative. And stay tuned. Laura, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So just wanted to close with a reminder that we just started early planning for our second annual Business Resiliency Summit, which will have a good emphasis on cyber. So mark those dates. And I wanted to give my email address in case you have any questions for the Reprivita team. Feel free to email me and I'll be sure to get it to them if you're interested in the pilot or anything else. laura.johnson@ahcusa.org. And I think we made it in just an hour. So thank you for joining us during your lunch hour. We look forward to seeing you at the next one, and stay safe, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.